She walked onto the stage, ready to dominate. He sat quietly, with nothing but a calm gaze and the weight of his truth. But when Jasmine Crockett tried to humiliate President Ibrahim Traoré on live television, what he said next didn't just silence the room, it changed it forever. This wasn't a debate, it was a lesson, and by the end, no one watching would see power the same way again. Stay with us, because this moment rewrote everything. The lights in the studio were merciless, sharp, unforgiving, the kind that demand presence and punish hesitation. This wasn't just a televised event, it was a political performance, beamed live to millions across the globe. The program's title, Global Power and Responsibility. America and the world seemed tailored to elevate one side while interrogating the other. It was the kind of space where US voices historically dominated, their cadence polished, their facts rehearsed, their victory assumed. At the center of the semicircle sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, one of Capitol Hill's most unapologetically charismatic figures. Her reputation was a blend of sharp-tongued brilliance and strategic spectacle. People tuned in to watch her not just speak, but dismantle. She had taken on CEOs, senators, and even foreign diplomats with flair. Today she was dressed in navy blue, her earrings subtle, her tone anything but. From the moment the cameras rolled, she leaned forward, eyes steady, a practiced smile dancing at the edge of her lips. Seated 3 chairs away was Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. For many viewers, he was a name they'd only recently learned, a leader from a nation too often overlooked in global headlines. He wore no flashy watch, no designer tie, just a well-fitted dark suit and a calm that unnerved the set. He greeted everyone with a quiet nod but said little before the broadcast began. He didn't need to assert his presence. His silence did it for him. As the host welcomed audiences and the introductions wrapped, Jasmine was already warming up. She fired the first jab with a light chuckle. "Let's be real," she said, her voice confident. "When we talk about leadership on the world stage, it's Washington, not Ouagadougou, setting the agenda." The room laughed, the kind of laugh that echoes approval and dismisses challenge. Even the moderator smirked. Traoré didn't. Instead, he looked at Jasmine, not with defiance, but with a clarity that unsettled. "This is not Ouagadougou," he said evenly. "That's exactly why I came." It was not a comeback. It was a statement. For a split second, the studio shifted. Something in the air tightened. Jasmine's smile held, but her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing what the audience couldn't yet name. This wasn't going to be another performance where she controlled the tempo. Traoré hadn't come to play defense. He hadn't come to prove himself. He had come to say something the world wasn't used to hearing, and he wouldn't need volume to make them listen. The room didn't know it yet, but something had already started to shift. Jasmine Crockett, still poised and polished, leaned into her next point with the practiced precision of someone used to dominating a stage. Her tone was part charm, part steel. "Let me get this straight," she said, glancing at her notes, then locking eyes with Traoré. "You stand here criticizing American foreign policy, yet your country still takes our aid, signs our trade agreements, and shows up to every global summit we host. So which is it, Mr. President? Resistance or reliance?" The audience reacted with the usual hum of tension and anticipation. This was the moment most had come for, the clean strike, the moment the underdog wobbles. But Traoré didn't flinch. He took a beat, blinked once, and then responded in a tone so composed it almost felt like he was reading poetry. "We accept aid," he said calmly, "because we must. But it comes dressed in conditions, often invisible until they bind. We are asked to smile for the camera, sign the dotted line, and say thank you while quietly surrendering a piece of our dignity. That line settled like dust over the studio. Jasmine opened her mouth to jump back in, but Traoré held the moment. I did not come here to pretend my nation is self-sufficient. But I also did not come to pretend your generosity is without cost. Conditional aid is not charity. It is leverage, and too often it is a leash. Now the audience was quiet. Not stunned, focused. He shifted slightly in his seat and told a story of a small village in northern Burkina Faso that waited years for international approval to build a school. The funds finally came, but with imported architects, foreign engineers, and cameras ready for ribbon-cutting day. The people who lived there weren't allowed to help. Their skills were deemed inadequate, their labor unnecessary.
So we waited, he said, voice steady. And when the aid paused again, we built it ourselves, with local brick, under mango trees, with tools passed down from our grandfathers. No logos, no headlines, but every child now learns under a roof we created. Jasmine gave a short laugh. You built it by hand? That's noble, but without us, where would you even get concrete? Traoré smiled, not in mockery, but in memory. From the red earth of Wahiguya, he replied gently, where we mix it with our hands and pride. There was no applause yet, but something in the crowd leaned closer. The performance was becoming a reckoning. Jasmine's rhythm was slipping, not because she'd lost control, but because she'd found something she couldn't rebut. A man not trying to impress her, just trying to be understood. The energy in the studio had shifted. What began as a political sparring match was slowly transforming into something heavier, something quieter, something real. Jasmine Crockett, aware that she was losing the crowd's easy laughter, decided to pivot to something no American official ever failed to fall back on: patriotism. She straightened in her chair, her voice laced with conviction. There's one thing I won't apologize for, she said, eyes locked on Traoré. The American flag means something. It stands for opportunity, for aid, for progress. For decades, we've extended that flag across the world. And whether or not people like how it waves, they benefit when it's raised. There was a murmur of approval, familiar and safe. It was the kind of statement that usually ended debates. Traoré didn't interrupt. He let it land. Then he folded his hands together and spoke in a tone that was almost mournful in its honesty. It is a beautiful flag, he began, and like all symbols, it holds power. But sometimes, you wave it over graves you've never buried. The sentence struck harder than any accusation. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Jasmine blinked. The audience was completely still. Traoré continued. I remember the day American contractors arrived in my hometown to inaugurate a water well. They held a ceremony, cut a ribbon, claimed credit. But that well had already been dug by young men in our village. The Americans simply added the metal frame. He paused. They came for the photo, not the effort. A single person in the audience clapped. It stopped quickly, but the silence that followed was different now. No longer defensive, more reflective. Jasmine tried to counter. But your country still accepts our help. That counts for something. He nodded, gently. Yes. We accept what we need, but we reject what makes us forget who we are. It wasn't defiance. It was identity. He wasn't rejecting aid. He was rejecting erasure. The idea that his people should be grateful to be seen only when it benefited someone else's narrative. Traoré leaned slightly forward, not with aggression, but clarity. If your help requires us to play the background while you take the stage, then it is not help. It is theatre, and we are done being props in someone else's show. That line didn't provoke applause. It provoked thought. Jasmine had entered the room expecting applause lines, but Traoré had brought something else entirely. Not anger, not ego, just legacy. And that was beginning to speak louder than the flag ever could. Jasmine Crockett wasn't used to silence, not like this. She'd navigated Washington hearings, media ambushes, even crossfire debates where being the loudest meant being the last one standing. But now, even her voice felt heavy in her throat. The lines she had memorized, the stats she had prepared, the confidence she wore like armor, it was all still there. But it wasn't landing. Because Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just challenged her, he had shifted the floor beneath her feet. Still, she had one card left. The card every empire plays when it starts to feel the discomfort of being seen too clearly. She leaned in slightly, voice sharper now. "Let's be honest," she said, holding his gaze. "You're only on this stage because we built the stage. We created the infrastructure, the platform, the system. Without us, this conversation wouldn't even exist." It was meant to be a clincher, a reminder, a final tether to the hierarchy she believed still held. But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He waited just long enough for her words to echo. Then he said quietly, "You built the stage, perhaps, but we brought the truth, and that's what fills the seats." For the first time, the audience gasped, not loudly, but in that way people do when something sacred gets spoken aloud. Traoré reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, laminated photo. It looked old, slightly worn. He held it up for the camera. "This," he said, "is a school we built in the Sahel. No foreign contractors, no international aid, just us, just hands and will and belief."
He turned to Jasmine, not as a challenger, but as a mirror. "This is what you haven't seen, and this is why I came." No one clapped. No one spoke. The moderator had frozen. Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no comeback for that. Not because she lacked words, but because something in her recognized that she'd just been handed a truth too deep to deflect. A man had walked into a room designed to elevate others and quietly, steadily reminded everyone watching that dignity does not need permission. That presence alone, authentic, grounded, unbought, was power. What broke Jasmine wasn't humiliation. It was realization. He hadn't come to win. He'd come to be heard. And the whole room had finally listened. In the days that followed, the clip of Ibrahim Traoré's quiet gesture, the photo, the line, "We brought the truth," flooded across social media, news outlets, and university lecture halls around the world. It wasn't a soundbite crafted in a PR war room. It was real, unrehearsed. And in its stillness, it struck something deeper than outrage. It touched the part of people that still believed words could carry weight without being shouted. In Johannesburg, youth-led panels began to pop up on campus lawns, asking the question, who builds the stage and who controls the mic? In Washington, D.C., policy interns circulated a transcript of the exchange, not as a takedown, but as a study in restraint, presence, and power. Even among those who didn't agree with Traoré's worldview, there was a near universal respect for how he'd carried himself. No anger, no theatrics, just truth laid bare. Jasmine Crockett didn't disappear after that debate, but something in her changed. In a quiet follow-up interview with a local station in Atlanta, she reflected openly. "I thought I was prepared," she said, "but I wasn't ready for that kind of conviction.
He didn't argue, he didn't flinch, he just stood there and let the truth sit with us. I didn't lose that debate because I was wrong. I lost because I wasn't really listening. Not until the end. Weeks later, her office quietly sent a team of policy aides to West Africa, not for a photo op, not to help, but to observe how local communities were organizing, building, thriving without Western hands in the mix. It wasn't a pivot in ideology. It was a shift in humility. Traoré returned to Burkina Faso not as a viral sensation, but as something deeper, a symbol of what quiet strength can do when it walks into a room that wasn't built for it and refuses to shrink. He hadn't come to shame Jasmine Crockett. He hadn't come to humiliate America. He came to offer something most leaders forget how to give: perspective. And in the end, he didn't just leave her speechless. He left her changed. He left us all changed. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a world of noise and spectacle is to speak softly, stand tall, and carry a truth that does not ask for applause, only acknowledgement. That's when words stop being moments. That's when they become legacy. Jasmine Crockett walked into that televised debate expecting another public win. With her charisma, sharp delivery, and crowd-tested lines, she was prepared to dominate, to outwit, and to remind the world where power truly resided. Across from her sat Ibrahim Traoré, the president of a small African nation rarely discussed on Western stages. For many, he was an afterthought in a debate designed for soundbites and spectacle. But Traoré didn't bring soundbites. He brought silence, poise, depth, and a kind of truth that didn't need to raise its voice. Throughout the exchange, Jasmine threw every rhetorical weapon she had: mockery, patriotism, economic leverage. And every time, Traoré responded not with confrontation, but with clarity. He didn't speak to win. He spoke to be understood. He wasn't there to challenge Jasmine's power. He was there to remind her and the audience that real leadership doesn't depend on domination. It depends on dignity. By the end, Jasmine had nothing left to say, not because she had lost an argument, but because she had heard something undeniable. A man who didn't come for applause, who didn't need to justify his place on stage, had quietly redefined what power could look like. This was not the fall of a politician. This was the rise of perspective. The lesson: true power doesn't need volume, it needs presence. We often think strength means always having the last word, but sometimes the most transformative thing we can do is listen deeply, respond calmly, and carry our convictions with quiet certainty. In our personal lives, at work, in family disagreements, in social conversations, we're often tempted to overpower rather than understand. But Ibrahim Traoré's example shows us another way: to stand firm without arrogance, to speak truth without shouting, and to turn even a confrontation into an invitation to reflect.
Ask yourself, in your next disagreement, will you aim to defeat or to be heard? Will you win the moment or earn respect for how you carried it? The world needs more voices that don't just speak loudly, but speak meaningfully. And even more so, it needs listeners, those who can recognize truth even when it arrives gently. If this story made you pause, if it made you think about the kind of leader, friend, or human you want to be, then please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that don't just inform, but inspire. Stories that stay with you long after the final line. Stories that remind us all the most unforgettable moments often begin with someone refusing to raise their voice and choosing instead to raise the standard. Thank you for watching, Let's keep building a world where wisdom, not volume, leads the way.